Kuhn Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @KuhnReview, that is @CuendReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@kuhnreview.com. That is INFORMATION or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the National, Tuesday the 27th of May 2025, from the news section. Children among 50 injured in Liverpool parade car crash. Article written by Lucy Jackson. 4 children are among around 50 people who were injured after a car ploughed into a crowd of people during Liverpool Football Club's Premier League victory parade. Merseyside Police said a 53-year-old white British man from the Liverpool area, the driver of the car, had been arrested and that the incident is not being treated as terrorism. Crowds were seen trying to stop the driver, with emergency services arriving quickly at the scene to treat casualties. At a press conference late on Monday evening, Dave Kitchen from North West Ambulance Service, NWAS, said 27 people were taken to hospital and 20 people were treated at the scene, with 4 children among the injured. There are no reported fatalities. He said 2 of those taken to hospital, including one of the children, suffered serious injuries. Kitchen said some patients had also taken themselves to local hospitals. Nick Searle, Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service Chief Officer, said 4 people who were trapped under the car, including a child, were rescued by firefighters. On Tuesday morning, Liverpool City Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham said there are still 4 people who are very, very ill in hospital. Further updates are expected throughout the day as an investigation into the incident continues. In a statement, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, "The scenes in Liverpool are appalling. My thoughts are with all those injured or affected. I want to thank the police and emergency services for their swift and ongoing response to this shocking incident. I'm being kept updated on developments and ask that we give the police the space they need to investigate." Meanwhile, First Minister John Swinney said, "Dreadful scenes in Liverpool tonight. What should have been a day of joy turned to tragedy. All our thoughts are with the injured and their families." Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar said, "Deeply disturbing and horrifying scenes in Liverpool today. My thoughts are with all those injured or affected. It should have been a day of celebration in a brilliant city, not for such despicable violence." And that article was written by Lucy Jackson. From the National, Tuesday the 27th of May 2025, from the politics section. Reform by-election candidate denies Anna Sarwar ad is racist. Article written by Steph Braun. Reform UK's candidate in the upcoming Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election has defended his party's Facebook video attacking Anna Sarwar, denying it is racist and that the party have misled voters. However, Ross Lambie said the claim that the Scottish Labour leader will prioritise the Pakistani community was a quote from us rather than Sarwar. The controversial advert has been condemned by other political parties, with First Minister John Swinney describing it as racist and calling for Meta to take it down. The video claims that the Scottish Labour leader will prioritise the Pakistani community in Scotland, as it plays clips of the politician urging more people from South Asian backgrounds to get involved in politics. Voters go to the polls next week in the Scottish Parliament by-election, which was called following the death of SNP MSP Christina McKelvey. Swinney has said the contest is likely to be very tight between the SNP, Scottish Labour and Reform UK. Nigel Farage's party does not currently have any MSPs. Lambie, who is a councillor in South Lanarkshire, was pressed on his party's online ad when he appeared on the BBC Good Morning Scotland programme on Tuesday. He said disaffected voters are turning to his party, adding, "If you look at Parliament, there's a lot of young faces that don't seem to know what they're doing." So people look at Nigel Farage. They like Nigel's bullish attitude on how to make his country great again. He was questioned on his claim of there being an open-door migration policy in the UK, saying immigration figures are out of control. Asked about the video's claim that Sarwar will prioritise the Pakistani community, he said that's a quote from us. It was put to Lambie that Sarwar does not use these words in the video clip, with the Reform candidate saying, "We're not misleading people at all. All we've done is share 2 clips of Anas Sarwar's own speech." Lambie said prioritising the Pakistani community was what the whole speech was about, and Sarwar was merely deflecting. The Reform councillor denied the video amounts to racism, saying it shows another example of the 2-tier society that the left are trying to build in this country. People should be in positions of power based on merit and their contribution to society. We shouldn't be trying to foist various minority groups into that position. The Lib Dem candidate in the election, Aisha Mir, earlier told the programme that the video is scummy tactics. The SNP's candidate is Katie Loudon, who was campaigning alongside Swinney on Monday. Asked about the Scottish Government's funding for local councils, she said, "I'm never going to sit and not argue for more funding for local authorities." Loudon also responded to an attack from Labour, whose candidate is Davy Russell, that she had voted against funding for Hamilton's town centre, saying, "What we're talking about here is one line in a Labour amendment at South Lanarkshire's budget. I'm very proud not only of the record of our SNP group at South Lanarkshire Council, but what we have chosen to back." And that article was written by Steph Braun. From The National, Tuesday the 27th of May 2025, from the news section. Scottish Labour by-election candidate snubs BBC interview. Article written by Lucy Jackson. Scottish Labour's candidate for the upcoming by-election in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse has snubbed an interview with the BBC. Davy Russell was not able to join BBC Scotland's Good Morning Scotland GMS programme on Tuesday morning. Russell has previously come under fire for refusing to take part in a televised TV debate and for a series of heavily edited social media clips, which have led to accusations that he is unable to string a handful of words together. BBC Radio Scotland said it was interviewing all the candidates ahead of the crucial by-election on June 5th, which is being held after the death of Christina McKelvey MSP. Yet Gary Robertson, one of the hosts on GMS, told listeners that Russell would not be interviewed on Tuesday's programme. Scottish Greens candidate Anne McGuinness was also unable to join, he added. Robertson said, "Throughout this morning's programme, we'll be hearing from candidates. We had hoped to speak to Davy Russell, who's standing for Scottish Labour, and the Scottish Greens candidate Anne McGuinness, but neither of them were able to join us this morning. We hope to speak to them in the coming days." Russell has previously refused to take part in a televised debate led STV political editor Colin Mackay, claiming he would rather be knocking on doors, despite the hustings taking place at 10:40 p.m. He has also been at the centre of a transparency row after it was revealed that Scottish Labour failed to disclose he worked for a scandal-hit company. Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar previously dismissed criticism of Russell as classist, saying, "That's a completely disparaging comment that is below the belt and demonstrates a classist approach to someone who is from this community and speaks like someone from this community." And that article was written by Lucy Jackson. From The National, Tuesday the 27th of May 2025, from the news section. United Airlines flight from Edinburgh cancelled amid fault. Article written by Lucy Jackson. A United Airlines flight departing from a Scottish city was cancelled after a mechanical fault was found on the aircraft. The flight from Edinburgh to New York was due to depart at 1:50 p.m. and land at 4:30 p.m. local time in Newark, New Jersey on Monday. However, an issue was detected with the Boeing 757 aircraft, which led the plane to return to the gate before eventually being cancelled. Edinburgh Live reports that those travelling on the aircraft were rebooked onto a later flight to New York. A spokesperson for United Airlines said, United Flight 162 from Edinburgh Airport to New York returned safely to the gate and was cancelled due to a potential mechanical issue. Customers were rebooked onto the next available flight to New York. Edinburgh Airport recently welcomed the return of another major US airline, with American Airlines resuming their service to Philadelphia. It is the first time the airline has set off from the Scottish capital in almost 6 years. The airport connects Scottish passengers to several destinations in the US, including direct flights to Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, and New York. And that article was written by Lucy Jackson.
This is from The National on Tuesday, the 27th of May, 2025, from the comments section. Angela Rayner is well aware that Israel has broken international law. This article is by Jonathan Shafi. Angela Rayner knows fine well that Israel has not only breached but obliterated international law. She was asked in a Sunday TV interview whether she thought it had. "That's not for me to determine," was the stock response. Everyone, including her, knows this is farcical. Yes, the courts will make their judgments, but it is beyond the realms of seriousness to suggest there is the slightest chance whatsoever that Israel's action in Gaza have been in compliance of the International Court of Justice provisions or any other international legal structure. Of course, it is complicated for Rayner as it is for Keir Starmer and David Lammy, despite their recent criticisms of Israel. For they have led a government which has been a fully paid-up partner in the horror that has been unleashed on Gaza. As Conservative MP Kit Malthouse says, there will be a reckoning. Because what we have borne witness to is a genocide. That is a view to be found among the world's leading experts on the issue, including Israeli academics and scholars. This is not a new or sudden development. From the very start of this latest onslaught, the Israeli War Cabinet made its intentions clear. As the now former Israeli Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, now wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court, declared on October the 9th, "We are imposing a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we will act accordingly." Nothing was hidden from view, despite the superciliousness of both government and media discourse in the West. While some attempted to excuse the language as rhetoric in the heat of the moment, anyone with a rudimentary understanding of the apartheid nature of the Israeli state and its policy towards the Palestinians knew that these words would be combined with the most advanced military technology in the world to continue the Nakba. This led Raz Siegel, an associate professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University in New Jersey, and endowed professor in the study of modern genocide, to write as early as October the 13th, 2023, that we were looking at a textbook case of genocide. In his analysis, he explained that perpetrators of genocide usually do not express their intentions so clearly, and that Israel's goal is to destroy the Palestinians of Gaza, and those of us watching around the world are derelict in our responsibility to prevent them from doing so. While many did, those in power did not. To top it off, those who spoke out were defamed. But it is in these moments when you have to stand up and be counted, not when the tide eventually turns and it's easy to do so. By then, after 19 months of incomprehensible death, bombing and siege, it is too late to save lives and impose sanity. Until very recently, having received permission from the Prime Minister and Bono to be a little more critical, the media class, in general terms, was staggeringly uncurious and stony-faced about the reality of Israel's Gaza policy, even after Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest warrant was issued. Days after Siegel's comments, 789 scholars and practitioners of international law, conflict studies, and genocide studies signed an open letter to raise the alarm. Evidence of incitement to genocide has also been present in Israeli public discourse earlier in the year 2023. For example, Israeli Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich called Palestinians repugnant, disgusting, and called for wiping out the entire Palestinian village of Hawara in the West Bank. They urged the international community to take immediate action to prevent genocide, and all the while the great and the good scoffed at anyone who dared raise the issue in these terms. They were always, however, in denial of the truth. After the world's leading human rights organisations, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, stated that Israel is committing genocide and acts of genocide, it became harder to ignore and had to be reported on. Now, researchers from Israel, the Netherlands, the US, the UK, Australia, Croatia, and Canada say Israel's conduct meets the legal threshold of genocide. Professor Ugur Umut Ungor of the University of Amsterdam and the NIOD Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies says that such an assessment prevailed among his peers, and while there are those who say it is not genocide, he doesn't know them. At the same time, scholars who initially disagreed with applying the term to Gaza have now come to the inescapable conclusion, such as Shmuel Liederman of the Open University of Israel. At the same time, scholars who initially disagreed with applying the term to Gaza have now come to the inescapable conclusion, such as Shmuel Liederman of the Open University of Israel. We can now add to this various UN bodies, the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, and even the former Foreign Affairs High Representative for the European Union, Joseph Borrell, who says, "We've all heard the objectives stated by Netanyahu's ministers, which are clear declarations of genocidal intent. Seldom have I heard the leader of a state so clearly outline a plan that fits the legal definition of genocide." This issue will not only determine the fate of the Palestinians, but of the world. There is no other way to put it. Either we bring the atrocities to an end, with guarantees of Palestinian human rights and self-determination, and ensure all of those responsible for war crimes, including those in the UK government, appear at The Hague for tribunals, or we continue down a path that threatens global security, our common humanity, and the erasure of a people. A world in which you cannot only commit genocide, but get away with it. The tide is starting to turn. Too late, much too late, but it is in large part down to public pressure that it is. Everyone has a voice, no matter how incidental you think it is. We must use it and amplify it with conviction to make certain the tide flows towards justice, lasting peace, and liberation. And that article was written by Jonathan Shafi and read by Lynn McNeil. This is from The National on Tuesday the 27th of May 2025, from the comments section. Reform UK are a real and present danger in Scotland. This article is by Ellie Gummersall. Last weekend should be a wake-up call to anyone who doesn't believe that the far right poses a genuine threat here in Scotland. On Saturday, a considerable number of far-right protesters took to the streets in cities across Scotland and the UK as part of what they called the Great British National Strike. They rallied in Aberdeen, Dumfries, Dundee, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Inverness and Perth, as well as a number of cities south of the border, in protest against immigration and net zero policies, among other issues. In Glasgow, they waved the flag of Israel and the Union flag, as well as banners adorned with slogans including "Free Tommy Robinson." They were heard chanting, "Refugees not welcome here." The group was met by counter-protesters from a broad coalition of left-wing community groups and political organisations, and the far right were ultimately outnumbered, but not by much. The far right bloc was undeniably substantial and was an unavoidable presence for anyone wishing to make use of our city centre shops this bank holiday weekend. For those who were the target of their hateful ideology, particularly immigrants, Muslims and people of colour, they made the city centre a less safe place to be and even evoked traumatic memories of the violent far-right race riots which plagued the streets of England and the north of Ireland last summer. For me, the protests weren't the only reminder of a far-right rise at the weekend. Also on Saturday, I was in Stonehouse campaigning for the brilliant Anne McGuinness, the Scottish Green Party's candidate in the Hamilton, Lark Hall and Stonehouse by-election, which was triggered by the very sad death of my friend, the SNP MSP, Christina McKelvey. This is the first Scottish Parliament by-election of the current Holyrood term and the first parliamentary by-election in Scotland since Keir Starmer's right-wing Labour government took power at Westminster. It's seen as a test for a struggling SNP, a collapsing Labour Party and the rise of Reform UK. While Reform are unlikely to win, it's clear they've been dominating the narrative of the campaign. Vox Pops by a number of media outlets asking people how they plan to vote have consistently shown a high rate of support for Reform. But they weren't the winners on the doors I knocked last weekend. By far the winner of the campaign so far, just over a week from polling day, was apathy. A huge number of people made it clear they had no plans to vote, scunnered by a lack of change over several years and declaring they're all the same when asked about the political parties on offer this election. Voters have tried the SNP, they've tried Labour, and they've tried the Tories, and none of them have been able to demonstrably and radically improve the lives of ordinary people. That's not in any way to disparage Christina's brilliant work. I know she was a fantastic MSP for the communities she represented. She was a socialist, and she always fought for better for her constituents. But she was one MSP out of 129. She's exactly proof of why we need more socialists elected to Holyrood across multiple parties. Nonetheless, voters are clearly fed up. I spoke to a number of Reform voters on the doors in Stonehouse, and very few of them would align themselves with the hateful protesters outside Buchanan Galleries, just a couple dozen miles up the M74. Most of them were just people who feel like they've tried every other option and nothing else has worked, so why not give Reform a go? And the thing is, I get it. People can see their public services crumbling, their communities falling apart. Nigel Farage tells them it's the fault of immigrants, and then Starmer, Labour Prime Minister, reinforces that idea. When almost the entire British political and media classes keep repeating the lie, it doesn't matter how untrue it is. People will believe it more and more. It's precisely why Starmer's approach is so dangerous and so clearly doomed to fail. It's precisely why we need more left-wing socialist voices who can counter these dangerous ideologies. We know that the real enemy of the working class arrives by private jet, not by small boat. We know that the rich are getting richer, with millionaires and billionaires hoarding the wealth created by the working people, whose wages have stagnated over the past several years. We know that it's not good enough just to talk the talk, we have to walk the walk, opposing cuts and fighting for the redistribution of wealth to fund our vital public services, making use of the full powers of devolution to tax the rich, and fighting for an independent Scotland where we have the full capability to build a fairer country. Many of the final seats to be declared on each regional list next year will be closely fought between the Greens and Reform. With both the SNP and Labour moving rightwards to varying degrees, we need more left-wing voices in the Scottish Parliament who can counter the far right and their hate. On the doors in Stonehouse last weekend, there were multiple apathetic voters who were leaning towards voting Reform or just staying at home. There were multiple who, after a conversation with our activists, will now be strongly considering voting Green. There's little to no overlap in the policy platforms of our two parties, and there's not a huge number of Reform Green swing voters. But where Reform present themselves as anti-establishment, while being backed by billionaires and city bankers, Greens genuinely are against the status quo establishment, which makes the rich richer and offers nothing for ordinary people. Our task, it's clear, is now to get that message out. And that article was written by Ellie Gomersall and read by Lynn McNeil. This is from The National on Tuesday the 27th of May 2025 from the Culture section. Whisky brands are paying for campaigns made by firms outside Scotland. This article is by Peter Strachan. Whisky is one of Scotland's most iconic products. It's big business too, generating a whopping £7.1 billion last year for the UK economy. Our leading food and drink export product, Scotch flies the flag for Scotland around the world. Trump's tariffs might bite, but to me this was sounding like a whisky glorious good news story, until I watched a wee TikTok video the other day. A day in the life of a cinematographer living in London is a very revealing snapshot of why Scotland's whisky producers are failing Scottish creative talent. As the protagonist trains it north, he tells us that Scotland hits him like a cinematic dream. He's part of a London-based film crew parachuted into Moray to film an advert for the Glenrothes Speyside single malt Scotch whisky, which, according to its website, is the world's most elegant whisky, as envisioned by its founders 150 years ago. Scottish whisky, London crew. On his arrival, before a single frame is shot, there's a crash course in whisky production. I was ahead of him here, having spent a summer after my first year at Glasgow Uni working as a kilted Glenfiddich distillery tour guide in Dufftown back in 1987. I can still remember the skill it took when the Saga coach tours pulled in to avoid the wandering hands of hordes of elderly ladies who had little desire to hear how whisky is made, but plenty of intent on making me blush. The young cinematographer learns that the essential ingredient is the exceptionally pure water naturally filtered through volcanic bedrock and sourced straight from the grounds of the Glenrothes estate. Scottish rock. This liquid's 50% softer than the bottled stuff and, of course, what comes out of London taps, our narrator informs us. Scottish water. The whisky is crafted by a small dedicated team of lifelong whisky makers. Scottish team, Scottish craft. The ad is eventually filmed, and at the end of the day, the production team dashes home to London, except for our man who has to spend the night in Aberdeen before lugging all the camera kit down the following day. London camera kit. Watching this video got me wondering, what on earth was a London film crew doing in Speyside filming a Scotch whisky commercial? Isn't there lots of creative and production talent, not to mention camera hire companies, here in Scotland that could have done the job and supplied the kit? What's going on? Scotland's whisky makers spend a fortune on marketing, 2 to 5 times their budgets for distilling and bottling their products, according to one insider. It adds up to billions. This ought to be great news for Scotland's creative talent, who absolutely have the skills and craft to produce impactful campaigns and content. But it's not. Investigating more than a dozen whisky brands, including some of the biggest names in the business, I discovered they've all paid for publicity campaigns over recent years, almost exclusively made by ad agencies, production companies and directors based outside Scotland. The results of my Snap survey are a shocking revelation. There's one notable exception, LS Productions in Edinburgh, which was a production partner on a recent ad for Glenmorangie featuring Harrison Ford, and the production company on another for Highland Park. But the overwhelming picture is one where Scotland's whisky producers aren't spending their enormous marketing budgets on Scottish creative talent. Scotland's geology, the water and the barley, masterfully combined by the age-old craft of the malters, mashers, coopers, distillers and the blenders, are what define our national spirit. They are its DNA and have been advertised as such by the industry for centuries. Yet our whisky companies aren't extending this reverence to the equally prodigious talents of Scotland's creatives. Enshrined in law, the process to create single malt Scotch whisky must be done at one location. But when the English Whisky Guild recently applied for the same protected status, Scots distillers were up in arms, fearing the reputation of their products would be damaged because proposals for English whisky are said not to have the same requirements. The Scotch Whisky Association even recently called for the UK and Scottish governments to protect its bottom line in the face of consumer spending tightening, increased domestic tax and regulation, and turbulent global trade. But its members ought to be doing more to help Scotland's struggling creatives who are facing far more existential threats. It smacks of double standards and a betrayal of sorts to me and many colleagues working in advertising, film and TV production here in Scotland. There are historical reasons why our whisky makers have turned their back on Scotland's creative talent. After the 2008 financial crisis, ad spend was severely reduced as costs were cut. Scottish ad agencies folded and talent left for London. Companies such as Diageo, the largest producer of whisky, got used to working with creatives outside Scotland, or brought a proportion of their agency work in-house. The owner of Johnnie Walker, the world's best-selling Scotch, which became one of the UK's top 5 most valuable brands in 2023, Diageo spends approximately £3 billion every year on marketing. Very little of this budget, I presume, is spent here, given that its recent Keep Walking and Bold Steps campaigns were made by creative talent based outside Scotland. But imagine how many jobs would be created and sustained in Scotland if a lot more of this spend was invested instead in our creative talent. This is exactly what I'm calling for Scotland's whisky makers to do. Being Scottish is what makes them distinctively world-class. They bank on it. Likewise, Scotland's ad agencies, production companies, producers, directors and cinematographers have barrel loads of conceptual and production skills to meet the brief. Scotland's extraordinary creative talent and its whisky producers can work together to be a perfect blend. Like a great malt in the making, this is a relationship that deserves to mature over time so that both enjoy good health. Slangevar. And that article was written by Peter Strachan and read by Lynn McNeil.
The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Anti-monarchy campaigners blast King Charles' sham speech. An article written by Fiona Brown. Anti-monarchy campaigners and the Scottish Greens have renewed calls for the abolishment of the monarchy after King Charles opened the Canadian Parliament on Tuesday. Following Prime Minister Mark Carney's success in the recent election, King Charles was invited to deliver the throne speech at the Canadian Parliament's opening on Tuesday, the first time a royal has done so in almost 50 years. The speech focused on Canada remaining strong and free in the wake of annexation talks from President Trump and has garnered criticism from the Scottish Greens and campaign group Our Republic over displays of hypocrisy. Greens co-leader Patrick Harvie said, having a state-subsidised royal family is unjustifiable in 2025. With the cost of living crisis still wreaking havoc on people's lives, the NHS on its knees, and austerity damaging public services, we should not be funneling hundreds of millions of pounds to the already super-rich royals. This antiquated system has no place in a modern democracy. Scotland would be better off as an independent republic. Indeed, opinion polls show more and more people in our nation are coming to this conclusion. It's for every country to make that choice on their own terms, but there's strong support for an elected head of state in Canada too. The public is growing increasingly tired of handing the royal family public money on a platter and allowing them to hoard our nation's land and natural resources. By redistributing their wealth and putting public money where it belongs, into public services, we can tackle inequality and truly empower the people of Scotland. Latest YouGov opinion polls show favourability scores for the royal family in Scotland considerably lower than in England and Wales. King Charles had 7 points out of 100, with the royal family in general scoring -1 and the institution of the monarchy as a whole -7. Tristan Grayford, co-founder of monarchy abolition campaign group Our Republic, said, King Charles wants both to appear as a symbol of Canadian independence from the United States, all whilst back at home preparing the banquet tables for an unprecedented second state visit for the American president, threatening Canada with annexation. The image of Charles as the great diplomat is a sham. There are no values or purpose behind his visits to sit on gold-leaf thrones around the world other than to cling to the last remnants of his personal power and status. Not satisfied with lining his billionaire pockets whilst demanding we pay for his extravagant parties here, now the Canadians have to pay up for his trips to play emperor abroad, all while he prepares to host a wannabe emperor who has his eyes on Canadian soil. An article written by Fiona Brown. The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Ardrossan Harbour deal is far from complete, campaigners claim. An exclusive article written by Steph Braun. Campaigners fighting to save Ardrossan Harbour fear that negotiations to bring the site into public ownership are far from complete after meeting with key players in the talks. Transport Secretary Fiona Hislop announced earlier this year that she'd asked officials to look at the potential purchase of the harbour in North Ayrshire. For almost 200 years, ferries have left from the harbour for Arran, but for the majority of this year there have been no services from Ardrossan because the Glen Sannox and its sister ship the Glen Rosa, that is yet to enter service, are too big to berth there. The Glen Sannox has been travelling to Arran from Troon alongside the MV Alfred, whilst the Caledonian Isles, which is due to return to Ardrossan next month, has been out of action since January last year. The Ardrossan Harbour Task Force met for the first time in a year in April, after which the Scottish Government said it remained committed to trying to purchase the site. However, since then, campaigners from Arran for Ardrossan Harbour have met with CMAL, Transport Scotland, CalMac and Peel Ports, which currently owns the site. Wiley Hume, chair of the group, claimed that they were told at the meeting by Kevin Hobbs, the CEO of government-owned ferries and harbours body CMAL, that the public ownership deal is far from complete. He also claimed that CMAL said that Peel Ports was asking for an exorbitant amount for the dilapidated harbour that it could not afford. Mr Hume added, "Throughout the entire meeting, he and the Transport Scotland representative treated us as an irritant and gave the impression that they were meeting us under sufferance. At no point in the discussion did Mr Hobbs say that he was committed to saving Ardrossan Harbour or that he's strongly committed to pursuing the buyout." Mr Hume said that the group now plans to campaign more aggressively against Peel Ports, including organising a protest outside the company's offices in Glasgow. Peel Ports said that it has been working with pace and energy on negotiations, but claimed that this has not been matched by other parties at the table. Transport Scotland said that a timeline can only be reasonably established and published should actual purchase and transfer of control of the port be successful. Bosses explained that neither CMAL nor the Scottish Government could force the sale of a port or to use compulsory purchase powers under existing harbours legislation. CMAL told The National that it remains fully committed to maintaining a robust and resilient ferry service, but must ensure that we deliver the best value for the public purse. The task force involves Transport Scotland, North Ayrshire Council, Peel Ports, CalMac, CMAL, the Isle of Arran Ferry Committee and the area's MSP, Kenneth Gibson. The Ardrossan port requires a costly berth realignment in order to accommodate the new Glensannox, which entered service to Arran in January, and the Glen Rosa, which is now not due to be delivered until 2026. The Ardrossan Harbour project, to develop the port and make it suitable for the Glensannox and the Glen Rosa, was given the go-ahead way back in 2018 by then Transport Minister Hamza Yousaf, but the project was paused in 2023 and a fresh business case has never emerged. With ferries only going in and out of Troon for the past few months, residents in Arran have been struggling to get to medical appointments at Crosshouse Hospital in Kilmarnock, which is easily reachable by bus from Ardrossan, but much more challenging to get to from Troon. There are also fears that Ardrossan could suffer a similar fate to Stranraer, which in 2011 lost the ferry to Northern Ireland after more than 150 years. The local economy quickly took a significant downturn after Stena Line moved up the coast to Kenryan. A CMAL spokesperson said, "We met with Save Ardrossan Harbour, Arran for Ardrossan Harbour, CalMac and Transport Scotland at the CMAL offices last week to discuss the current situation. Whilst we recognise that this is an emotive issue for the Arran and Ardrossan communities, we are in the middle of a commercial negotiation process which limits the amount of information that can be shared. We are fully committed to maintaining a robust and resilient ferry service for the Isle of Arran, and no option is off the table. However, we must also ensure that we deliver the best value for the public purse." Transport Scotland said that it will update Parliament and the community once there is progress to report. A Transport Scotland spokesperson said, "We absolutely understand people and communities' views in favour of retaining Ardrossan as the mainland port and their frustration that there is not yet more progress to report. The Scottish Government remains committed to ensuring that the Arran ferry service is fit for the future, and we want to see progress just as much as local campaigners do. However, as was explained to them when they met recently with CMAL, Transport Scotland and CalMac, a timeline can only be reasonably established and published should actual purchase and transfer of control of the port be successful. CMAL and Peel Ports need time and space to undertake and conclude negotiations." A Peel Ports spokesperson said, "We've entered negotiations in good faith, working with pace and energy to a timetable we believed was achievable. Unfortunately, that pace and energy hasn't been matched by those at the negotiating table. We appreciate that the buyers have other ferry issues to contend with, but reaching a swift conclusion will require them to give this negotiation a higher priority." An exclusive article written by Steph Braun. The National Politics on Wednesday the 28th of May. By-election hustings chaos as Labour candidate snub leads to a walkout. An exclusive article written by James Walker. A hustings for a crucial by-election was thrown into chaos last night after the Tory candidate walked out due to his Labour counterpart not showing up. Campaign group No Cuts Lanarkshire hosted the event at St Peter's Chapel Hall in Hamilton on Tuesday evening, inviting all the candidates standing for the upcoming by-election in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse on the 5th of June. The SNP's Katie Loudon, the Scottish Socialist Party's Colette Bradley and Anne McGuinness from the Scottish Greens turned up. But both the Labour candidate David Russell and Reform UK's Ross Lambie dodged the invite, with Labour instead represented by the Labour leader of South Lanarkshire Council, Joe Fagan. This led Conservative candidate Richard Nelson to stand up right at the start of the hustings, just as the candidates and Mr Fagan had taken to their seats, and announced that he would not be taking part. It comes amid controversy over Mr Russell repeatedly dodging local hustings, an upcoming STV debate, radio interviews and the media in general during the campaign. A series of heavily edited social media clips have also led to accusations that he is unable to string a handful of words together. "I don't think it's right that I debate the council leader," Mr Nelson told the roughly 50 or so local voters in the audience. "I would rather have debated with David Russell, with the actual candidate. So I'm going to withdraw from here because I don't think it's fair that the leader of the council comes on his behalf." This led to some claps from the audience. One woman said, "Absolutely." One man in attendance then added, seemingly referring to Mr Nelson's withdrawal, "Shocking, absolutely shocking." The woman then asked, "Why is it shocking?" One of the hosts from No Cuts Lanarkshire then intervened. He said, "I'm just going to try and keep this a bit stable. I understand your frustration with Richard withdrawing from the debate, and unfortunately it's his decision to make, whether we agree with it or not." The woman then interrupted, adding, "Can I just ask, this is about candidates. Why is the leader of South Lanarkshire Council sitting at the top table? That shouldn't be happening." The host then responded, "I'm not a member of the Labour Party." But the local resident again intervened, saying, "But he's not a candidate. He shouldn't be here." Later on, after each candidate and Mr Fagan made their opening statements, the floor was opened to local residents to quiz them. The same woman then asked Mr Fagan directly, "How can you stand and say your speech and say about how David Russell is going to lead for the constituency, going to stand in Holyrood and speak for the people of this constituency, when he can't turn up to radio interviews, when he can't turn up to hustings, when he can't speak without Anna Sawa by his side?" Mr Fagan said, "Well, right now he's at an event on the NHS." She then responded, "He's always at an event, Joe." On Wednesday, Mr Sawa attempted to defend Mr Russell while being interviewed on BBC Radio Scotland's Good Morning Scotland show. The programme's host, Gary Robertson, quizzed Mr Sawa about why Mr Russell appears to be avoiding all media outlets during his campaign. Mr Robertson said, "We invited the candidates for this upcoming by-election onto the programme yesterday, but your candidate didn't come. Why not?" Mr Sawa replied, "That's a matter for the campaign team and the campaign." The Scottish Labour leader went on to claim that Mr Russell had done media interviews and that he has more planned in the future. However, Mr Robertson further called out Mr Sawa as he asked, "But you understand what the issue is here, that many of your opponents believe that he is running scared. That actually, when it comes to appearing on programmes like this, he's just not available." Mr Sawa replied, "Well, I don't accept that, because Davy Russell, is the only candidate that lives in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse." An exclusive article written by James Walker. The National Politics on Wednesday the 28th of May. Curtis pours cold water on talk of a Reform shock win. An exclusive article written by Steph Braun. Professor Sir John Curtis has said he doubts that Reform will win an upcoming Scottish by-election, adding that it would be quite an achievement for them even to come second. The top pollster has thrown cold water over rising speculation that Reform will take second place in the Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse by-election, where the SNP is trying to hang on to the seat previously held by the late Christina McKelvey. SNP figures, including an MSP, told The National this week they believed that Reform were poised to come second in the June the 5th vote, and that Mr Farage's troops had taken wholesale the support which used to go to the Tories in the South Lanarkshire seat. However, the MSP insisted that there was a hard ceiling on Reform support, adding that they would be surprised if they won. There is growing concern over the success of Reform following their victory in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election in England last month and several council elections. Professor Curtis said Reform's threat in Scotland should not be ignored, but he still predicts that they will come a good third in Hamilton. Asked how he felt the party would do, he told The National, "All we know is that Reform is continuing to ride on a high in the English election polls. They're running at about 30%, so running at about 20% in Scotland is perfectly conceivable. But you then have to ask, can Reform get from 20% to being able to get to a third of the vote and manage to win the seat? That's quite a challenge." While they managed to win Runcorn and did pretty well, what we don't know yet is whether Reform is capable of doing what I would call a Lib Dem by-election spectacular. That is, to record an increase in support in a by-election that is way beyond what you would expect, given the party's standing in the national polls. I'm not sure that Runcorn provided any clear evidence that that was the case. They'll be doing well, given what we know to be getting more than 25%, as a rough guess. It's not a threat to be ignored, but at the moment one's expectation would be that Reform ought to come a good third. Reform took Runcorn from Labour by just 6 votes, as Sarah Pochin overturned a 14,696 majority, whilst the party took control of 10 councils in England earlier this month. Asked if there was any chance of them winning in Hamilton, Professor Curtis said, "The difference between 25% and 33% isn't so great, and given the limited knowledge that we have, we can't say that it's impossible, but it would be spectacular if they managed to win. I think even coming second would be quite an achievement." Earlier this month, a poll from Survation suggested that Reform would become the main opposition at Holyrood. It said that the SNP would remain by far the biggest group in the Parliament, with 33% on the constituency vote and 29% on the regional vote, whilst Reform UK would come second, with 19% on the constituency vote and 20% on the list vote. Professor Curtis said that while the result of the by-election is difficult to predict given the lack of Scottish polling, he said that whoever does emerge victorious will probably only require a third of the vote to do so, meaning that the result is not likely to mean as much as the winning party will make out. No one is going to do terribly well. We're living in a very fragmented political environment, and the winner may well end up with no more than a third of the vote, Professor Curtis said. Whoever wins will win on a low share of the vote, and their rhetoric will vastly overestimate the significance of their achievement. That's the one safe prediction that we can make. He went on, one can't rule out the possibility that any one of those 3 parties, Labour, SNP or Reform, could possibly win. That's as far as we can go. What Professor Curtis said he is hoping is that the by-election, taking place just under a year before the wider Holyrood election, will go some way to confirming whether Reform's rise is real in Scotland. It looks as though the SNP is the favourite, but thereafter life becomes pretty uncertain, he said. We're looking for evidence at the ballot box beyond what we've got so far, that the world is as the polls say it is, and that we are indeed in a different world north of the border than we were 12 months ago. That's what we're looking for an answer to. An exclusive article written by Steph Braun. The National, on Wednesday the 28th of May. Opinion. Keir Starmer is finding out that not being a Tory is not enough. A column written by Seamus Logan. Not that it would have got us a great deal of political traction for having done so, but for anyone prepared to go around properly kicking Labour's tyres ahead of the last UK general election, it was clear that there were 2 rather large problems just waiting to emerge. The first was that even after 14 years out of power, the party was woefully unprepared in policy terms for entering government. The second was that even measured against the pitifully low calibre of recent Tory leaders, Keir Starmer just isn't very good at politics. Let's deal with the second of these points first. Prime Minister's Questions is hardly the be-all and end-all when it comes to the public forming their impressions of party leaders. However, it still plays a role in testing a leader's ability to think on their feet and set out a political narrative on behalf of their party. Forensic was the word that most commentators reached for in describing Mr Starmer's low-key approach at first, but while that should have been like kryptonite to the bluster, blether and outright dishonesty of Boris Johnson, it still never really landed. In the end, Mr Starmer profited simply by not being his opponent. We can skip past Liz Truss, in this at least. Yet even when it came to Rishi Sunak, a man who finished his premiership with even poorer ratings than did Mr Johnson, Mr Starmer's leaden, deaden, flat-footed approach barely made an impact on prevailing trends. Again, he profited simply by not being his opponent. The first point, however, is the one which has played the biggest part in Mr Starmer and his party squandering what little goodwill they might have begun with. For while a Prime Minister with a tin ear for public opinion can still prosper if they have good advice on tap and a plan that people understand and think will work, it's pretty clear that Mr Starmer entered Downing Street last year without having either of those things. You can question whether the initial blame for this lies with Sue Gray or Morgan McSweeney as his two key chosen lieutenants at the time. Either way, the failure even yet to pull together a compelling narrative about what the Labour government wants to achieve in office and how it plans to do it is something where the buck stops with the Prime Minister alone. A government with a plan and a clear story to tell would be able to castigate the Tories for the mess they made of Brexit and the economic disaster they left behind them. It would have a compelling argument about why any genuinely tough decisions were both necessary and in everyone's best long-term interests, and the impact of those decisions would be something which they'd have steeled themselves to ensure fell only on those best able to withstand the impact. Instead of that, it's the elderly, the disabled and the financially marginalised who either have or are about to bear the brunt of Labour's fiscal tightening. Their Brexit mitigations are offered not confidently as a return towards sanity, but almost as an apology wrapped in toxic island of strangers rhetoric. Meanwhile, showpiece pledges such as cutting energy bills simply fall to pieces in the face of bills heading obstinately in the opposite direction. The harsh lesson for Labour is that if you campaign on a pledge of delivering change, then change you had better deliver. And so we had the announcement last week that Labour will reverse their cuts to the winter fuel payment, just without any detail on when or how. Mr Starmer has also apparently let it be known in private that he would like to scrap the two-child benefit cap after all, although once again there is no indication of when or how this might come about. Yet there is still no confirmation of when his government's child poverty strategy, originally planned for publication earlier this year, will eventually see the light of day. And even yet, having apparently failed to learn anything from those earlier mistakes, his government is still considering ending the personal independence payments that so many people rely on. It's all drift, dither and lack of direction, and while ordinarily Mr Starmer would continue to profit by simply not being his current Tory opponent, he has been outflanked by Mr Farage, claiming from the luxury of opposition that he would reverse the winter fuel payment cut and the two-child cap, while the SNP has already committed to doing so from the position of being in government. In many ways, Mr Starmer seems to be becoming like Gordon Brown in government, surrounded by courtiers pretending to know his mind, all while the man himself remains suspended in a permanent state of indecision. Except, liberated from office, even Mr Brown has managed to say publicly and in his own words that the two-child cap is cruel and needs to go. So, with less than a year to go until the Holyrood elections, where is Anna Sawar in all of this? Speaking truth to power in London, urging Mr Starmer to read his lips. Telling Scottish voters with the chutzpah that only he can muster that they need to vote Scottish Labour in order to protect Scotland from Labour. Before the last election, Labour politicians were on loop claiming that a resurgence of Scottish Labour was necessary in order to secure a Labour government in Westminster. It was a claim which was as dubious politically as it was mathematically. how ironic it is that barely 12 months later it's now Scottish Labour who is desperate for a resurgence in UK Labour fortunes in order to save its own skin next May. A column written by Seamus Logan, who is the SNP MP for Aberdeenshire North and Moray East. The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Schools help make a splash ahead of the Island Games. An article written by Lewis Murray. Young people in Orkney are helping to build excitement for this summer's Island Games. Schools across the area have received education packs that will allow children to learn about the geography, the flag, the language and the culture of each of the 23 different islands that will arrive for the Orkney 2025 International Island Games in an effort to boost local excitement and pride in the event. Founded on the Isle of Man in 1985, the Island Games are an Olympic-style sporting event designed to allow small islands from around the world the chance to compete with each other in a range of sporting events. Kirsty Talbot, the director of Orkney 2025, said, "The Games are already having a fantastic and positive influence on young people on Orkney. Through the education pack and other school-led activities, children are discovering more about sport, other island communities and the incredible sense of international friendship that the Games foster. The Games have helped to launch the careers of athletes that have gone on to compete at the very top ends of their sports. The Isle of Man-born Mark Cavendish won 2 gold medals at the 2003 Games on his home island 2 years before starting his professional career. Orkney 2025 will feature 2,000 athletes competing across 12 different sports events, and 24 island communities will compete, from as far afield as the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, the Falklands and St Helena off the west coast of Africa. Orkney has benefited from investment in its sporting facilities as a result of hosting the event, including a new athletics track and upgrades to 2 golf courses. The organisers are keen to involve the local population as much as possible, with even the event's mascot, an orca named Ola, designed by a local child, 12-year-old Sarah Sutcliffe. Children across Orkney will also be recording a version of Scots folk band Pete and Diesel's song Island to form part of the opening ceremony. Ms Talbot added, "We've been so impressed with the enthusiasm and creativity shown by the pupils and their teachers, from learning the island song to immersing themselves in the languages and traditions of our visitors. It's brilliant to see so many children playing a role in this once-in-a-lifetime event for Orkney." The Games will run from July the 12th to July the 18th, and the opening ceremony and all sporting events are free and open for all to attend on a first-come, first-served basis. An article written by Lewis Murray. The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Scottish airports face summer disruption as strikes loom. An article written by Lucy Jackson. Scots travellers are set to face disruption this summer after airport workers at 2 airports rejected pay offers. Around 600 workers employed by Menzies Aviation at Edinburgh and at Glasgow airports could go on strike after rejecting separate pay offers, trade union Unite said. Members involved in the dispute include dispatchers, allocators, airside agents and controllers, and support airlines ranging from American, United, British Airways, Aer Lingus, Emirates, Lufthansa, Loganair and Air Transat. A pay increase of 4.25% had been offered to about 300 Menzies Aviation workers at Glasgow Airport, while 300 workers based at Edinburgh Airport rejected a pay rise worth around 4%. Unite Industrial Officer Carrie Binney said, "Summer strike action looms over Edinburgh and Glasgow airports because the pay offers on the table from Menzies Aviation aren't good enough. Menzies Aviation has the ability to improve its offers, and they can easily resolve this pay dispute without any disruption to the travelling public. If the company fails to table a better offer to our members, Unite will have no option but to ballot our members for strikes over the summer holidays." Unite said that it had reached a pay deal with Swissport, the other main ground handling company at the airports. Unite General Secretary Sharon Graham said, Unite's Menzies members have emphatically rejected unacceptable pay offers. The Menzies Group is posting sky-high profits, and our members who contribute towards this success deserve far better from the company. Commenting, Phil Lloyd, Senior Vice President UK at Menzies Aviation, said, Following the rejection of recent pay award proposals, we remain committed to seeking a resolution. We have invited Unite to return to the table to continue discussions this week, and we hope to reach an agreement which is workable for both the business and our employees at both Edinburgh and Glasgow. We will continue to work to pursue an agreeable solution to protect services for our airline and airport partners and their customers. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Tesla's monthly sales in Europe plunge by half. An article written by Laura Pollock. Tesla sales across Europe plunged by 50% last month, even as growth in the electric car market picked up pace, according to newly released data. The numbers are the latest indication of how much the Tesla brand is suffering because of the backlash against billionaire chief executive Elon Musk over his political views. Sales of Tesla vehicles in 32 European countries tumbled by 49% to 7,261 in April, down from 14,228 in the same month the previous year, according to figures released by the European Automobile Manufacturers Association. At the same time, sales of battery electric vehicles by all manufacturers rose by 28%. Meanwhile, sales of petrol and diesel-powered cars slumped. The figures, which cover the European Union's 27 member countries and 5 other nations outside the bloc, back up early data from Sweden, the Netherlands and Denmark released earlier this month that had pointed to a sales collapse. Tesla has been reeling from protests and boycotts over Mr. Musk wading into politics. It also faces other factors, including an ageing model lineup and intensifying competition from rival electric vehicle brands, particularly from China. United States President Donald Trump's trade war has also turned Europeans off buying American brands. In recent days, President Trump threatened to impose a 50% tariff on EU goods, accusing the bloc of being very difficult to deal with, before agreeing to delay the duties until July. In one sign that Tesla appears to be losing ground to cut-priced Chinese brands, sales at China's SAIC rose by 54% in April, according to the association's figures. SAIC owns a slew of auto brands, including UK-based MG, known for its low-cost electric vehicle models. Tesla is also suffering because it had to shut down factories for several weeks this year, while upgrading its best-selling Model Y sport utility vehicle, pinching supply. For the first 4 months of the year, Tesla's European sales fell by roughly 39% to 61,320, whilst the continent's auto market as a whole showed little change during the same period, according to the data. For April, car sales in the EU edged up by 1.3% from the previous year, showing signs of recovery despite the ongoing unpredictable global economic environment, the group said in a press release. An article written by Laura Pollock. The National Politics on Wednesday the 28th of May. The UK government is slammed after trade envoy Ian Austin visits Israel. An exclusive front-page article written by Lucy Jackson. The UK government has been accused of making a mockery over its supposed opposition to Israel's war on Gaza after it sent a trade envoy to the country just days after suspending talks on a new deal. On Monday, Lord Ian Austin, the UK government's trade envoy to Israel, was in Haifa in northern Israel visiting various projects, where he said that the government would continue to encourage British businesses to export to Israel and for Israeli businesses to invest in the UK. It comes after the UK government suspended negotiations with the Israeli government on a new free trade deal last week, as Foreign Secretary David Lammy described Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government as extremists. Hours after that announcement, the UK government sent a spy plane to monitor Gaza. A spokesperson has since confirmed to The National that it would be sharing the information it gathers with the Israeli military. Mr. Austin, who has previously insisted that the UK was still open for business with Israel, despite talks on the new deal being suspended, wrote on X, "Greetings from Israel. I'm here to meet businesses and officials to promote trade with the UK. Trade with Israel provides many thousands of good jobs in the UK and brings people together in the great multicultural democracy that is Israel." The visit has been condemned by former First Minister Humza Yousaf, who said that Mr. Austin was shaking hands with those overseeing a humanitarian catastrophe. Mr. Yousaf told The National, "Lord Austin's visit to Israel under the banner of boosting trade makes a mockery of the UK government's supposed opposition to Israel's actions in Gaza." While David Lammy talks tough about suspending trade negotiations, his envoy is shaking hands with those overseeing a humanitarian catastrophe. This isn't the concrete action that the Prime Minister promised as Israel starves children in Gaza. It's providing legitimacy to a government headed by a man wanted by the International Criminal Court. If the UK truly wants to stand for international law and for human rights, it must match its words with action, not continue with business as usual. Meanwhile, Independent MP and former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn asked what it would take for the UK government to cease support for Israel. Mr. Corbyn told The National, "We said that the Foreign Secretary's performance last week wasn't fooling anybody. We said that actions speak louder than words. We said that the government was still giving Israel the support it needed to act with total impunity. We were right." I wonder, has anyone from the government seen the footage of the Palestinian girl trapped in flames during the Israeli strike on her school? If the sight of human beings burning alive won't compel them to cease their military and economic support for Israel, what will? Mr. Corbyn was referring to an Israeli attack on a school in Gaza, which was being used as a shelter for displaced people. The attack killed at least 31 people and wounded more than 50 people. Jonathan Purcell, Senior Public Affairs Officer at the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, said, "It looks like the government is chiefly concerned with walking to the diplomatic tightrope and keeping Israel on side. They're finally starting to talk the talk, but this means nothing if it's only offered up with the tiniest of concessions. Suspending trade talks isn't enough. They must suspend existing trade deals. Sanctioning a few outposts and individuals isn't enough. They must sanction the ministers responsible. And banning 8% of arms licenses isn't enough either. They must end all arms licenses and military collaboration. Until then, the words ring hollow." The National understands that Mr. Austin will be in Israel until Friday and does not have any scheduled meetings with Israeli officials. The UK government insisted that Mr. Austin did not have any involvement in trade negotiations, but that his role is to promote the government's trade and investment agenda. His visit to Israel is unrelated to the free trade deal, which has been suspended. A UK government spokesperson said, "We suspended talks with Israel on a new free trade agreement because it's not possible to advance discussions with a Netanyahu government pursuing such egregious policies in Gaza and the West Bank." Lord Austin is in Israel this week in his capacity as trade envoy to maintain our relationship with Israeli businesses. An exclusive front page article written by Lucy Jackson. The National News on Wednesday the 28th of May. Voiceover artist demands that ScotRail stops using her voice for AI announcements. An article written by Hamish Morrison. A voiceover artist has demanded that ScotRail stops using her voice in its artificial intelligence announcements, claiming that it's been used without her permission. Gayanne Porter said that she felt violated because she did not give permission for her voice to be used in the way it has by the company contracted by the state-owned rail company. Her voice has been used to train the new AI-generated announcements on ScotRail trains, something that the Swedish tech company Reed Speaker said was covered in their contract. But in a Facebook post, Ms Potter said, "I discovered last week that ScotRail's new, horrible AI train announcer Iona is in fact using my voice data, and nobody told me. I've been in dispute with a company in Sweden, Reed Speaker, for over 2 years to get my voice data removed from their website." The voiceover artist, whose credits include work for CBBC, Heart Scotland and STV, said that her understanding of her arrangement with Reed Speaker was to provide text-to-speech recordings to be used for translation purposes from foreign language copy pasted into their site, and as an accessibility tool for people with visual impairment. Ms Potter added, "So imagine my distress when I discovered that ScotRail has installed the Reed Speaker model Iona that contains my biometric voice data as their new announcer on their trains. I didn't know. I wasn't asked. I did not consent. I wasn't given a choice. 4 years ago, we didn't have the AI we use now. You can't consent to something that doesn't exist. You should be able to withdraw your consent at any point. Reed Speaker won't let me." She said that her issue with the company was not about money, adding, "It's about my identity. I feel violated. ScotRail should employ a real human, irrespective of who it is. Why continue to choose a dreadful AI version of me when I'm right here, and I know how to pronounce Mulgai?" Iona, the name given to ScotRail's AI announcer, has been used on some routes including those north of Inverness and its high-speed intercity services over the last 10 months. A spokesperson for the company said it would be a matter for Ms Potter to take up with Reed Speaker, who her contract is with. "We have no plans to remove the voice from our trains." Reed Speaker Chief Marketing Officer Roy Lindemann said, "We are aware of Ms Potter's concerns. Reed Speaker and Ms Potter have a contract regarding the use of her voice. Reed Speaker has comprehensively addressed Ms Potter's concerns with her legal representative several times in the past." An article written by Hamish Morrison.
This is from The National on Thursday 29th May 2025. From the comment section. Don't take Nigel Farage's threat to abortion rights lightly. By Kelly Given. Since the election of Donald Trump in 2016 and the subsequent rise in evangelical pro-choice narratives emerging from the US, it was only a matter of time before the chickens come home to roost here in the UK. When the far right rises, women's rights fall in parallel. We know this for a fact. Thinking we would somehow be immune to it here, or that women's rights are so socially enshrined that they could never be compromised, is naivety at its very best. And, like clockwork, this week, Nigel Farage officially kicked off the campaign to roll back those hard-won rights. He said that while he considers himself to be pro-choice, he thinks it utterly ridiculous that abortion is legal until 24 weeks of gestation. To an unsuspecting voter, this might seem like genuine concern, but this is where it always starts. Social regression doesn't burst onto the scene with a radical tear-up of all rights on its first day. It begins with subtle rollbacks, disguised as genuine concern, and before we know it, those rights will be in the shredder in the way they always were intended to be. Trump didn't go after Roe versus Wade on day one in the White House, but his election and the legitimisation of his ideology paved the way for him to accelerate those plans. And now women in the US have fewer rights than they used to. It's that simple. A slow but intentional erosion of what you think is secure until it isn't. Far-right ideology at its core demands that women be relegated back in time, where we will report to the kitchen to make sandwiches and rear children that we will be forced to birth no matter the circumstances or risk to our health, where we will be seen and objectified, but God forbid that we would be heard, where our bodies will be governed for us and our voices silenced by the men who make the rules. You might think that hyperbolic, but if you actually digest far-right messaging, it isn't all that subtle. It's actually incredibly forthcoming about the role they think women should play. Or better yet, you could look at how the far right has successfully hijacked women's rights in the US, where that started, and how it has progressed to where it is now. Because it's going to follow a similar trajectory in the UK if we rely too heavily on our complacency, and we can believe that or not, but the truth will remain the same. Farage, in the same breath as denouncing late-term abortion, said that he wants to make it easier for people to have children. And who does he want to have those children? Who will be primarily responsible for their care? Who will have to sacrifice their career progression and independence? Woman, obviously. And everything I've just listed will be played off as collateral damage, a worthwhile sacrifice for the ultimate blessing that is motherhood. Well, fuck that. If there was ever a time to get our backs up and be harsh with our words, the time is now. Access to safe, legal abortion is a pillar of women's health care. The best thing it achieved was stopping women from dying in backstreet abortion clinics, or worse, at home by themselves in desperation. But it also handed women the freedom and power we deserve to have over our own bodies. It afforded women importance by ourselves rather than having the importance so closely tied to and undermined by our ability or not to bear children. It's not something we shout about every day because we assumed the right was settled. And that was our first mistake. Rights, hard won, are rights that can be taken away should a leader with those intentions sway an electorate at the right time. The appetite is and always has been there. Just recently, MPs quietly voted against proposals that would have removed abortion from the criminal code. That means it's still technically a crime in England and Wales to have an abortion without strict medical approval. Even in Scotland, where NHS services are devolved, women face gruelling travel to abortion clinics and services often lack the specialism required to deliver late-term abortion, forcing women to cross the border to access vital health care. It's true that abortion has been legal, to an extent, for quite some time, but there is still a way to go before it is actually accessible and readily available. We are simply not as developed on this as we think we are, and our right to it remains very fragile indeed. Too fragile to risk handing its future to the mouthpiece of the far right. We need to be realistic about the threat we are facing. Farage isn't just a middle-class pomp with a pint and a grievance anymore. He's a credible threat to the rights of women and our bodily autonomy. He is a credible threat to every minority, and women will not be spared regardless of how ingrained you think our rights are. If his latest polling results remain steady until 2029, he will be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and he will have a majority to wield his newfound power. That would be disastrous for women. We simply can't let chaos merchants like Farage distract us from the consequences of their success, from what it would actually mean. To pull the wool over our eyes with the vague and disingenuous nostalgia of a once great Britain. The only thing great for women about a Farage premiership would be the threat to our freedom and autonomy. That article was by Kelly Given. This is from The National on Thursday, 29th May 2025. From the Culture section. Kneecap correct BBC headline after Transmit show cancelled. By Lucy Jackson. Kneecap have issued a correction after a BBC headline claimed that the band had pulled out of the Transmit Festival. On Wednesday evening, it was announced that the Irish rap group would no longer appear at the popular Glasgow Festival due to police concerns. They were axed from the lineup by the promoters DF Concerts, who said in a statement, due to concerns expressed by the police about safety at the event, Kneecap will no longer perform at Transmit on Friday, 11th July. We thank fans for their understanding. Yet, a BBC headline appeared to suggest that the decision was made by Kneecap, stating, Kneecap pull out of Transmit over police concerns. Kneecap have since corrected the BBC over the headline, sharing the story on Twitter X and writing, Kneecap didn't pull out of Transmit, Kneecap were removed. The BBC's social media post has also been commonly community noted, where social media users suggest context to posts to reflect the fact that the band were axed and did not voluntarily pull out. In a statement following the announcement, the band said, to the thousands of people who bought tickets, flights and hotels to see us play, we are sorry, it is out of our hands. Glasgow has always been a huge city for us. We've played there many, many times with no issues, ever. Make of that what you will. The group has also announced a new concert at the O2 Academy in Glasgow on July 8th to try to make up for it. The decision from Transmit organisers comes after Police Scotland said last week that allowing Kneecap to perform at the festival would require a significant policing operation. A police statement on Wednesday said, any decision on the line-up at Transmit is for the organisers, and there was no prior consultation with Police Scotland before acts were booked. Officers have highlighted the potential reaction of such a large audience to this band would require a significant policing operation in order to support the delivery of a safe event. We have also passed on information from the public around safety concerns to allow organisers to make an informed decision on the running of the festival. That article was by Lucy Jackson.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.